But when I can look through the lens of how God sees them, I see a person that is going through struggles just like I'm going through, that's going through seasons of challenge just like I'm going through. It just looks different. And so how can I love them well?
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Lead Well Wednesdays on the Tailboard Misfits podcast. Back again with Brad. We're going to be talking about habits. Real quick, if you haven't already, make sure that you are subscribed to wherever you listen to this. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. You'll get to see all the shorts. Subscribe to or follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and just share the show. The only way we're going to grow is if you share it with your friends, watch it at work, send it to a coworker that's not on your crew, and just continue to share the message. Today, we're going to be talking about habits and what the habits that make a good fire service leader. And so what we're kind of start out with is just what is habits? What is a habit? What we perceive habits or good habits to look like in the fire service. So I'm going to let Brad define what is your definition of habits and what does it look like? What does a good fire service leader, what are some habits that a good fire service leader has?
So I mean, we could talk, like we had mentioned before the podcast. There's 100 that we could talk about, but there's several that kind of stand out in my mind, and I'd be curious to pick your brain on some that stand out in your mind. But I mean, the first one that kind of comes to mind would be humility. Talking about humility and selflessness, I think they kind of coincide, although they're different. But those are kind of the two that come directly to mind. Um, but yeah, as far as defining habits, it's things that we do without thinking, intuitively, subconsciously. And I know you just got off reading Atomic Habits, so probably better if you threw out a definition of exactly what a habit is. But to me, it's something that we've built into our subconscious brain, where we do it without thinking. We do it as second nature. It's our fallback. And so we talk about, fire service training. It's the things that we revert to when we're under pressure. Habits are just that, and they make up most of our day, and they free us up from having to think about all the mundane things that we do repetitively, and kind of free us up. But yeah, I'd be curious to what your definition of a habit is.
Yeah, it's something that we do with automaticity, something that you don't have to give thought to whatsoever. Brushing your teeth. You know that when you wake up, you're going to go brush your teeth. Tying your shoes. Those are all habits. They're activities that make up our character. I love the quote, "What you do defines who you are." I think that's a Groeschel quote. So all these habits that we do daily, from reading your Bible to reading books to going out for a run, all of those activities are habits that you've built up over time that really make up your character and who you are as a person. Just for me, that I know we probably are going to get into talking about it, but one of the things specifically, in my opinion, to the fire service, but I know that this could be applicable to any part of your life, is consistency. Consistency compounds over time. It adds credibility. It creates a stable environment for people to grow in. You mentioned humility, so I'd love to get into the habit of humility. Maybe even hit on a little bit of what it looks like to just begin to be humble, and what that looks like for you, and what it's looked like in your life, and how maybe even how you've grown in humility.
Walking in humility takes work. I think it takes a recognition and an honesty with yourself to know that you're not perfect, you're fallible, you make mistakes, and we all know that if we're being honest with ourselves. I think humility is being transparent with others with that fact, and giving a level of authenticity and transparency, I think, are all kind of under the umbrella of what we call humility. And I think for me, walking humbly, and why I think it's so important and so critical to being an effective and good leader, is when, which we can talk about pride, which is the opposite of humility, but when I recognized and started, when I started walking in humility with intent, and intentionally being transparent, intentionally trying to be authentic with people, I recognized the impact that I had in a conversation. When people see you walking in humility and they see your transparency and authenticity, it frees them from the need to be proud themselves. And so, I read my Bible, and the Bible talks about what is the opposite of humility? It's pride. And the Bible talks about pride comes before the fall. Anytime people walk in pride, it's never good, right? It never leads to a positive outcome, whether long term or short term. And so I think that's why I think it's so critical to walk humbly. And yeah, for me personally, that's kind of how it started. And I just saw that, like, again, I saw the impact that it had in conversations when I would open myself up, or when I'd admit a failure, or not react, or I'd screw up on the fire ground or screw up at the firehouse and just admit it and walk in that. Um, I saw the positive outcome on the other side, and I was like, man, this is a much more effective way to lead and to live than to just always feel like I have to be right, always feel like that I have to have the answers. So
Yeah, and I always when I first started, I don't know what you say, like learning about humility or really trying to be humble. The quote that resonated with me was like, humility isn't thinking less of yourself; it's thinking of yourself less. And I've talked about before how the selfishness for me personally, like that was a struggle for me at first, and really putting others' needs before myself, and learning to walk through that. But one thing that you said that I kind of was thinking about is the conversational aspect of it, because I'm living proof of this. Is like, previously, what do you say, in your previous life, earlier in my career, I was listening in conversation to respond, rather than just the whole thing, seek first to understand rather than be understood, right? Like, I've really tried to sit back and like approach conversations humbly, right? In a sense of like, let the person I'm talking to talk, and ask them questions about what they're talking about, rather than, oh, we're talking about one thing and me just giving my opinion on it. Like, chances are that's not what the conversation's for, if that makes sense. So when it comes to walking in humility, um, for me, a lot of it is, and specifically really to the fire service, is we have to understand, and I know it's thrown around a lot, and I'm sure we've said it on the podcast, like, in the fire service, nothing is proprietary. Like, we didn't come up with anything. So really just knowing that, this isn't us, this isn't our idea, this isn't something that we've just developed and it's like, oh, look at Brad and John. Like, this is something that we've learned from other people, and really just giving credit where credit's due, and then having the humility to admit, like, that we don't know everything. I always approach those situations like, I really don't know, but I bet I can find out for you, and then use the resources that I have.
yes, walking in humility, like apply. How do you apply that into your day intentionally? I think anything that we do, and it goes back to my personal belief, anything that we do under our own volition is it's got a limited amount of energy that we can put forth to it. If we're constantly having to attempt to walk in humility and it's not intuitive, there's a date to when that's going to run out. And so I think for me, how do we walk humbly as a habit? I think has to come from a security outside of self,
Mm,
right? Regardless of what you believe, I think when I am walking insecure of myself and insecure of my abilities and insecure of what people think about me, I think it's really easy to walk with a sense of pride because it's a facade. It puts on an armor of to protect myself from feeling less than, feeling not worthy. And I think when we start to shift where our security sits instead of ourself and our how good we are, because we all know we suck if we're being honest. Once I start, me personally, start to shift my security into who God says that I am, what he says of me, and that there's a hope for my life. There's an intent behind my life, and I walk securely in where my identity sits. It's much easier for me to walk humbly because my sense of self worth, my sense of security, doesn't come from from what other people say about me and how I'm perceived as a fireman. It comes from who God says I am. So it's easier to walk in the security of who He says that I am, and walk humbly and be open and love people well, than constantly trying to seek that validation of self worth through pride. Yeah.
Do you think, like, I know you've recently walked through like a season of just like where you've placed your identity at. And shameless plug here, if you guys haven't listened to Brad's episode on the Fit to Fight Fire podcast, you need to go listen to it. But do you think, in a sense of like where you place your identity, do you look at that as pride? Like, does this question make sense? Like, where you put your identity as a fireman, or like where you thought you were putting your identity, was that a sense of pride that just went unrecognized?
You could call it that. I think that there's probably a level of pride that went with that. That was a byproduct of where I was putting my identity. I don't think that pride was the root cause. If we get down to the root of it, which, yeah, I've talked about this, is I I've been a Christ follower for a long time, and I've always preached a little bit to guys that when we put our identity in the job and what people think about us, it's always going to let us down. People suck. We suck. We're going to fail. People are going to fail us. Even people that we think have our back. And I mean, people are fallible. That's how we were created. And I, I thought that my identity was in the right place because I was saying all the right words, but my actions were not reflecting what I was saying. And this fire that we made, this incident that we had in our department, God used it, I believe, to get my attention, and to, because He loves me so much, that He did that for me, to get my attention and show me that I was not walking in a place that was secure in Him. I was seeking uh, the praise of man, as the
Mm-hmm.
Bible puts it. I was seeking to be good, to be perceived as good to others, instead of really seeking security in Him. And so I kind of had an identity crisis, for lack of a better term, but it was unaware
Mm-hmm.
until that happened, and that was a season of growth for me, which was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So recently, and I want to say it was just like a devotional that me and the boys were doing. Something that was kind of pointed out to me was like um, that I didn't the reason why I asked that question is because I unintentionally was doing something that I didn't perceive to be prideful, but it was totally exposed as pride. Um, in a sense of like, in the fire service as a fireman, as a first responder, even, like, I've always used this excuse of like, I can't relate to other people, or other people can't relate to me unless you're another fireman, unless you're in another first responder, right? Like, I have to sit and listen to Nancy tell me about how she burned her cookies 14 times before she got it right. And these people just don't understand what we go through, blah, 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 blah. And like, at the root of it, like what was given to me, what was handed to me, or the words that were handed to me, is like how prideful that was of me to think that, like, oh, like, you don't know what I've seen, you don't know what I've walked through, you know. And so you're how do you say, like, more advanced, you're further along in your spiritual walk than I am. You've been I don't want to say you've been doing this longer, but you've been doing this longer. Like, have you ever walked through that to where like you couldn't like relate to air quote normal people? And like, how would you, or how did you, or overcome those things? Because like I said, being personally convicted of that being a prideful characteristic of mine really has opened my eyes to being relatable to other people and being able to connect to people that aren't in the fire service.
I don't think that there is one instance that I could point out, but what I can talk about when we talk about pride and encountering those circumstances is, I believe pride is a product of the flesh. And for those that aren't Christ followers that maybe listen to this or really don't have a stance on it, like, I, I tend to believe that we're fighting a battle internally to follow what seems right in our own eyes, it, or follow what seems right in the eyes of the person that created me and designed me for a purpose. So when my view starts to align with who I believe my creator is, I think it's much easier to not walk with a sense of pride and more of a sense of understanding and seeking to love. When I'm walking in a way that seems right to me and choosing to be my own creator and manifest my own destiny, it's much easier for me to take that stance and that perspective. When we talk about pride, dude, I fight pride every single day. We're constantly at battle with our flesh. And though I'm sure I've walked through a circumstance like that, it goes back to what I said at the beginning, or maybe in another podcast, which was, uh, God, I pray, and I pray this routinely, that He would give me His eyes to see people the way that He sees them. And life is all about perspective. We have a perspective as firemen, that we see the armpit of the world. This world is full of sin and destruction, and we get a front row seat in the theater of what that looks like. And so I think for us to walk in a way that says we've seen more, we've done more, and make people's life experience seem less than is totally prideful. But when I can look through the lens of how God sees them, I see a person that is going through struggles just like I'm going through, that's going through seasons of challenge just like I'm going through. It just looks different. And so how can I love them well? Well, I relate. I try to have empathy for them and say, man, that sucks. I can love that person well, and at the same time, or I can choose to say, I've been through something so much worse, which puts it back on me and makes it way more selfish. Um, so I think in order to lead well and to love others well, yeah, I think you just have to see things. You have to get out of your own uh, perspective. What's the word? Equanimity. You
Mm,
have to see things from other people's perspective before I think it's easier to relate to them. So yeah, I pray for that all the time because I think
mm.
that does a better job. That
No,
helps us lead well.
yeah, and you explained and helped with that situation easy, like a lot. So, um, okay, and we talked about humility, which the habit of humility we all know is going to take work, but it obviously has to be rooted um, in a
Something outside yourself.
right in a
Hmm.
genuine sense outside of yourself. So we're talking about getting into like criticism and being able to give criticism, but really as a good leader to be able to take that criticism and use it as an opportunity to grow. Right? Whenever you're faced with criticism, like you need to view that as an opportunity to grow in whatever area that criticism is about. So um, I would love for you to talk about just maybe, and I don't know, you don't necessarily have to give examples, but like what it's like to get criticism uh, and be able to grow from it rather than throw up these defense mechanisms that we're all naturally inclined to do and just kind of write it off.
Yeah. So uh, for one, it's hard. Receiving criticism is not always easy. Most of the time, it's not easy. But I believe that if we want to grow, right, growth takes friction, and friction is uncomfortable. So we got to learn to be uncomfortable. If we can't get used to being uncomfortable, we're never going to grow. So when people come to us, and I know we've talked about this before, but when somebody comes to me in my circle of trust, or somebody that, even if it's not somebody that I necessarily have in a circle of influence or a tight relationship with, if somebody comes to me and they point something out that they see that I'm doing wrong, or years ago, Brad would have tried to justify, tried to understand why they're coming to me and saying this, and like what's their stance in this, kind of ego driven and kind of self driven. But the older that I've gotten, and the more that I've understood uh, the principles of what it looks like to receive criticism, when somebody comes to me, and I can say this confidently, and it's not always easy, But I can tell you that I've built the habit of receiving criticism, that when somebody comes to me with something difficult that I don't like right away, doesn't mean that I always get it right. There are a lot of times, and I'm sure you can attest to this, that sometimes I do react, but the thought passes through my mind that this person is coming to me because they see an opportunity for growth. And I count that as a blessing. And so if I'm getting it right, my first inclination is to seek first to understand before trying to be understood, before trying to defend my position and defend why I'm doing something or why I am the way that I am. I try to seek first to understand. So I try to ask good questions. Okay, why are you coming to me to say this? Where do you feel like I am falling short? And try to seek to understand so that way I can grow, so that way I can get better. And if all we ever do is react and defend, then you're unteachable, right? That's when people wash their hands of you. If I come to you, or you come to me, John, and you tell me, hey, Brad, I see something that you're screwing up, and I react. Okay, he didn't listen. Okay, and then you come to me again, and I react. You didn't listen. You come to me again, I react. I didn't listen. Well, now you're like, this guy's unteachable. I've got nothing to offer him. So you wash your hands of me. So it's a really good and healthy place to be when people are coming to you and telling you, like, hey, you're screwing up. Hey, you're doing this. Hey, you're doing that. If it's rooted in the right place, if they genuinely want to see you grow and improve. Um, yeah.
And so when we're talking about criticism for me, like, and I know I've mentioned this before, like I used to be terrible at this, right? Like if someone would come to me uh, with what I perceive now to be an opportunity to grow, I would oftentimes just immediately throw up defense mechanisms, build a wall, not listen to anything they're said. And realistically, even if it was a person of authority, right? I'm sitting in the conversation, but I'm not present. Like I'm already in my head thinking of like, I'm not listening to anything this person's saying because I don't believe that I'm like that. And it's super selfish and super idiotic and ignorant of myself. But what I've since learned, and I really do believe that it's rooted in that quote, like seek first to understand rather than to be understood. So really trying to, and I know we're kind of hitting, beating the horse with a dead horse with a hammer, like, but really trying to understand why they felt they need to even talk to me about this. Like there's got to be something there. They have to be able to see, even if it's something super minor, they have to see something that made them want to talk to me about this. So really asking good questions and taking a moment to take in what they said to me and not just immediately respond. Because oftentimes, like, uh, I found myself in those situations early on when I'm trying to learn this is like immediately responding with a question, right? Because you're supposed to ask questions, but the question wasn't rooted in the right place. It was still a defense mechanism, except it was just in question form. So really just kind of taking a step back. And for me, sometimes what that looks like is it's like taking a deep breath and then like, okay, then ask a good question. Follow it up with not just why they do this, but like it helps me if someone can give me an example of what I did that was wrong. So I might ask for, can you think of a time where I actually did that? And they might not be able to. They might not be able to come up with something on the spot because they could just, essentially be fed up. But if I could get a good example of a time where I, didn't hit the mark or whatever the case is, that really helps me be able to, okay, now I've got that example and then build off that when it comes to asking questions. What is that quote you mentioned before we started was it Andy Stanley?
Andy Stanley said, if you don't learn to listen, you will eventually be surrounded by people that have nothing to say. So, I mean, that hits at all levels, right? Whether it's people surrounding you to help you grow, or if you're an administrator and you're surrounded by yes man, like you have to surround yourself by people. And it's so hard too, because taking criticism is difficult, but you want to be around people that are willing and bold enough to give you that criticism, and you need to welcome that. And when we react, it tells people through body language that we don't want their criticism. And so we lose out on an opportunity. And yeah, it's hard, man. So to give a specific example would be if every time that we have a conversation, and good leaders listen more than they talk, right? Good leaders ask questions. They want people to get to talk to them about themselves. That's how you start building rapport, building relationship. there comes a time, and I used to be really bad about this, is I was always looking for an opportunity to talk in the conversation instead of listen. And so instead of being an active listener, I would listen to what they would say and look for an opportunity to interject instead of just asking more questions and learning. And somebody came to me and they told me, "Hey man, you probably need to practice like listen a little bit more." And I don't think it's because you don't care, but it almost seems like you're not interested in what the person's having to say. And my natural gut instinct when hearing that is to say, "Well, man, I do care. Like I'm having a conversation. I'm listening to what there's." That's a reaction, right? That person saw an opportunity for me to grow and be better, and all I did was justify justify my stance. So if I can seek first to understand, then to be understood. So what does that look like? Hey, man, every time somebody talks, it just seems like you're not interested in what they're saying. Okay, take a second. That was hard. So what makes you say that? Well, every time you have a conversation, it almost feels like you're just waiting for an opportunity to say something instead of listen to other people. Okay, how do you think that I could get better at that? Well, man, just don't feel like you got to say something every 2 seconds. Just listen to what people are saying. So that conversation right there is on the side of I'm seeking first to understand and I want to grow. And now I can learn from that and say, okay, next time I have a conversation with somebody, I'm going to practice more listening than I am talking. And sometimes that may be hard for me to do, but now I'm growing. Now I'm getting better. Now I'm showing people value and not like I'm just the one that's trying to talk all the time. And so uh, if you take that approach to that
Yeah.
type of criticism, you open yourself up to get better, and that's the mission, right? That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think sticking with that example, like this is something that I've obviously been working on as well. But I'm to the point now where I can catch myself doing those things, and really like what that looks like for me. And we kind of talked about previously of being self-aware of like what you're doing, and even in the moment, right? And what I catch myself doing when I start slipping down that road is a lot of kind of like trying to start butt in, and it's just not working. I'm like, there's a reason for this. Okay. Like
Yeah.
it's just like that cue for me to sit back and really get into listening. So you've got to be able to walk in humility. You got to be able to take that criticism. I would love to hit on being a little bit in the sense of being a leader, whether it be peer-to-peer leadership or even down the chain, if you will, what it looks like to effectively give that criticism. Because we've talked about it before, and we talked about on previous episodes, like one of the most important things, or two of the most important things when it comes to receiving and giving feedback or criticism is tone and intent, right? We have to focus on those two things. So expound a little bit on that and what it looks like to give good criticism from a position of caring, but also delivering the point well and not tiptoeing around it.
Yeah, so for me, I go back to a scripture that says, "Sprinkle everything you say with a little bit of salt." Right? That's what was said in the Bible and it pertains to giving difficult information or just talking to people. Right? That's how we give criticism in love. And I think that we have to recognize as human talking to another human that criticism is difficult. Sometimes it doesn't always land well. So if we're giving people criticism in love the right way, that is done through a delicate tone, and leading and sometimes not always blunt and to the point, right? Like if you're messing up, you me coming to you and saying, "Hey, dude, you suck." Like, even if I genuinely see an opportunity for you to grow and want you to get better, like that's not going to be received as well as like,
Mm.
"Hey, man, I noticed the other day you were doing this, and I don't think it's the best look for you. I think you're capable of more." Right? I think that's much easier to receive, right? And that's almost goes without saying, but to have intentionality behind that, I think is where you win. I think sometimes our emotions get the best of us, and it's easy for us to just fly off the handle. You know, we're not supposed to discipline our children in anger, right? We're supposed to be calm and I love the word dispassionate, right? We've talked about that recently, kind of a new word to add to the vocabulary. But the whole point is I want, like, if I'm disciplining my children, I want to see a change in behavior for their betterment. So if I discipline out of anger, that's all they see is they see that's the discipline, is the anger, and they tend to shut it off. And in the same way with adults, if I'm emotionally charged when I come to you with something, you're much more likely to tune me out and just, okay, man, like chill out. Like, okay, obviously it's an issue with you because you're mad about it, and it's much easier to receive information when we come in with a little more diplomacy and like, hey, man, and from a place of love, like, hey, I care, I want you to get better.
Yeah, and I think to give like the one of the most recent things for me, and like trying to step into a role of like of leadership, if you will, like, and thankfully, like, we work for an organization that I don't want to say glorifies but values peer-to-peer leadership. Like you're not going to get in trouble for holding me accountable for something. And so recently on being a fireman, we relieve other firemen from a different crew. And over time, there had been some things that weren't being taken care of that should have been being taken care of by a new guy specifically. And it got to the point where I'm like, this stuff isn't getting done. Like, obviously, I don't know what's been communicated to him from the crew he's working with or whatever. So, like, okay, it's time for me to step into a difficult conversation with someone that honestly, like, for me, I really just don't like doing. I don't like being what even could be personally perceived as a asshole. And so I approached the situation very delicately and told him, like, hey, man, you seem like you're doing a good job. The guys have good things to say about you. I don't know if anyone's told you these things yet, but hey, this is what's kind of expected of us as tailboard firemen, specifically here at this station. Like, make sure you do this, this, and this. And a lot of it was like, oh, I wasn't even aware of that. Like, I'm doing that, but it wasn't at the right time frame or whatever it is. Like, and it was very well received. I don't think that it would have been received well if it was a, hey man, why is all this stuff not getting done? Like, why are you being a POS? That kind of thing. And so just really being able to see, I think like once, what I'm trying to say is I think once you're able to have an effective, difficult conversation, I think it becomes easier to delight in having difficult conversations down the road. Because if you haven't ever had one, it can be a little intimidating to approach someone that's even your peer or even like speaking like that guy, specifically speaking, isn't at the same, how do you say it, like level that I'm at. So even having it down, if you will, was intimidating because like I said, like you don't want to be perceived as an asshole, and you want to make sure that you're showing that you care about people and not just trying to down them. But once you're able to have an effective, difficult conversation, then I think you see the light in difficult conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the goal is to be effective, right? We want to have effective communication. If you got a new guy that's not taking care of the towels, he's not taking care of the trash, he's not doing the things, you want that to change. And like that, this is another conversation within, is like, do I want that to change for my benefit because I'm sick of seeing a full trash can, I'm sick of seeing towels full in the trash, or am I doing it for his benefit so that way he can be seen as an effective new guy, a good new guy, a guy who cares about his job and wants to take it seriously? And so I think when you go in and you recognize in yourself what's the purpose and intent, right? It's that's where you win. And so like if I have a new guy that's screwing up, by changing my tone and changing my intent and the way that I approach the conversation, I will have an effective outcome. And that's the goal, is I want to have an effective outcome. It's easy for us to be emotionally charged, but the goal for us in the moment, and sometimes it's okay to be blunt. Like you can be blunt. You just got to do it in love and understand, okay, maybe I need to be blunt to be effective in this conversation, this difficult conversation. But yeah, blunt is not always bad. It just depends the context and the conversation. But
Yeah. So this third point we wanted to talk about, and I want you to talk about this because first and foremost, you just have more experience in this, and it's really just like what you allow to lead yourself day to day, and how do you allow God to lead you day in and day out whenever you're looking for direction or even advice or just where to go and how to, in your words, like walk in obedience to what he's called you to do.
Well, I can tell you it's simple, but it's not easy, right? Um, so it's kind of a loaded question, but I have to go deep within myself and like my mission in life and why I am the way that I am. And the things that I do in life that manifests itself not only in the fire service but in my marriage, in as being a dad, and a friend, and so many different areas. Like my mission, and I'm on my way to that. Right, I'm still trying to achieve that vision, but my mission in life is to love others like Jesus did and spread the gospel message of love. That's my mission in life. And so when I go to work, everything that I do as pertains to mission in the fire service, all that, right? Wanting to put people above self, wanting to be effective at my job, wanting to lead well, all of that mission is rooted in the overall mission of my life, which is to love others like Jesus did and to spread the gospel message. So I think when I encounter situations at work or uh, it I always am constantly reminding myself of the overall mission of my life, which is how do I love people well in this circumstance? How do I walk in obedience with what God has called me to do in my life? And what does it look like to walk in obedience? I think, for one, for me, I have to know the Bible. I have to know what obedience is defined as through the Bible. I have to, if I want to live like Jesus, then I have to know how he lived. And that comes from reading the scriptures and uh, teaching myself how learning how he treated people. When we talk about leadership, I've said it before. I do believe Jesus was the best leader, the greatest leader of all time, regardless of your belief. I think a lot of people, even people that don't believe he was the Son of God, can agree on that. He was an incredible leader. So when I'm walking in obedience, and I'm rooted in the mission of my life, which is to love others like Jesus did and treat other and live my life like he did. Um, Reading the Bible and understanding his principles, I try to emulate in my job, in my life. And one of those principles, as it pertains to leadership, is Jesus told his disciples, uh, in the scripture, is go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, teaching them everything that I have taught you, and I'll be with you. I'll be with you in the process. Okay, so to go and make disciples and teach them everything I've taught you. Okay, well, how do I make disciples? That means I've got to have their influence, right? So I have to lead them well. So if I can lead them well, then they're going to have to then they're going to listen to what I have to say. And then I can teach them everything that Jesus taught me, which is to love others, hold others above yourself, do the right thing. All these principles and concepts that he talks about. And so anything that I do in my life, especially within my job, is rooted in a desire to go and make disciples and to lead and to love people and teach them everything that Jesus taught me. And so I think by when I walk in obedience, some days are easier than others. Some days I want to come into work and maybe I don't feel like doing whatever set tasks that we have done for the day, or maybe I have a bad attitude, maybe I didn't get to sleep, whatever the case is. I always try to remind myself of what is my mission today. It is to love others and to put others' needs above myself, to go and make disciples. And I can't do that if I'm focusing on myself. I have to get outside of myself and start focusing on others. And it doesn't always, it's not always great, but that's kind of the direction that I go personally.
Yeah, no, and that's good. So we're kind of talking everything about habits of a good fire service leader. And like we said at the beginning, there's so many different habits that we can perform daily that just make up an overall good leader. And realistically, when we were sitting here thinking about this, I think that these three are some of the, if not the most important ones. Humility. What does it look like to walk in humility? Criticism. How can we effectively take and give criticism? Because those are all opportunities to grow. It's an opportunity to grow when you're getting criticism, so to be able to improve on areas that you need to improve on. And it's an opportunity to grow when you're giving criticism, because it allows you to be able to effectively communicate. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that single difficult conversation that you have is going to go the way that you want it to. It does depend on a lot of on the other person, regardless of your intent and tone. And then just allowing a God to just lead you into what He's called you to do, and walking in obedience to what He wants in your life. We know and understand that not everyone has the beliefs that we believe. So I understand that last point could miss the mark for a couple people. But what I think that we could encourage people to do is just see the fruits that other people have been able to obtain through being in obedience to what God has called us to do. So, Brad, do you have any final things?
Yeah, that's what I believe, and I'm not trying to pour my beliefs on anybody by any means. That's what Brad Conrado believes. That's where my center is, if you will. That's where my mission in life is. And I think, like, if that's not what you believe, I think a good place to start is you have to get outside yourself. If you want to be an effective leader, like, and we're talking about habits of effective leadership, if you want to be an effective and good leader, you have to start leading from a place of service instead of self-service. And I think that last bullet point is that's what it's all about. I think you have to get to a place where you're doing your diligence as a leader to be of service unto others. We talk about anytime we climb in rank in the fire service, we're assuming more responsibility. We're assuming more responsibility of other people, the well-being of other people, the growth of other people. And I think when you can come to a place where you build into habit and routine of what does it look like to serve others, and to create a system where you can get outside of your selfish desires and what you want, and start putting the needs of the people that you serve and have influence over above the needs of yourself, I think that's when you start to win. That's when you start to become effective. I don't want to follow anybody that's always worried about their self and their well-being. I want to follow somebody that is concerned with me and my well-being and my growth. Because I've always said, people don't leave jobs, people leave poor leadership. When I don't feel valued, when I don't feel like I'm in a position where I can grow and get better, I'm going to go somewhere where I can. Regardless if they believe in God or not, if they're not there to serve me, which sounds selfish, but that's just the honest truth. Like, I want to get under somebody and learn from somebody and be mentored by somebody and taken care of by somebody that values me as a human and wants to see me get better. So yeah, I would say in a nutshell, that's it. Find the habit of putting other people before yourself.
Man, what a good place to end. All right, guys, we'll see you in a couple weeks. We're going to keep it going. Submit your submissions for what you would like to hear on Lead Well Wednesdays. We're always looking for ideas to talk about. And if someone wants to hear something specifically, or they want to learn something a little bit more, please just send it in, DM us, comment it on a YouTube channel or on Spotify or Apple, and just let us know what you think. But before we go, just remember, the best leaders know the way, show the way, and go the way. Stay ready, stay humble, and we'll see you on the big one.
Yeah, let's take a trip. Just sit back and light a split with this, and don't slip on a funky dope track. Jump back, strapped with a fat Buddha sack and a 7-8 black.